Hello, I'm Ruth Ashbee and welcome to my session on developing science department CPD. This is really some thoughts, suggestions from me and a sort of model really as to how we can improve department CPD in science. And it's centred around what I've called engagement with the subject discourse, which as we'll see is absolutely critical to excellence in curriculum work within a school. So just to give you a bit of context as to where I'm coming at this from in terms of my own thinking, I very much believe that ambitious curriculum and powerful knowledge should be at the heart of everything that we do in schools, and that this wonderful learning and challenging work is the entitlement of all of our students, and that we should do everything we can to make sure that they learn the very best knowledge and as much as they possibly can, and the most challenging and fascinating and interesting things to broaden their horizons and show them the world through the lens of all of our wonderful subject disciplines. And there is already out there a wealth of excellent thinking, written articles and books and blogs and so on. And this, what I've called discourse, is very much ongoing, but it's very much already in existence, certainly in our subject in science. And it is my belief that it's our duty to seek out this excellent thinking that's already out there, and to think hard about how we can apply it within our own practice, and make sure that all of our staff are also thinking hard about these ideas that are already out there. Linked very much to this is the idea of the department as the cultural and intellectual unit of the school. So it very much in terms of the CPD that happens within a school, it's so important that that happens both in a subject-specific sense, so that staff can consider ideas and work on development in relation to their own subject-specific curriculum, but also so that a shared language and understanding and kind of body of knowledge is built within that department. So you have this kind of cultural unit of people who speak each other's language and have that shared connection, and that is incredibly important for teaching students, particularly in a secondary school where they move from one teacher to another throughout their time with us. That kind of shared dynamic is absolutely key. And finally, I'm very committed to this idea that development is ongoing for everyone, and that our growth as teachers isn't something to be sought and achieved and then finished and left on a shelf. It's absolutely, everybody, whatever stage of their career, whatever stage of their expertise, has always got more to learn and to think about and to question and to challenge. And probably, if you're anything like me, I find that the more I read, the more I realise I need to read, and the more I think about, the more I realise I have more to think about, and the more I learn, the more I realise that I don't know. So this is absolutely a continuous cycle of improvement, and not kind of with a final goal in mind, but just more of a way of life. Let's move on to CPD then, and three principles I think we will do very well to bear in mind. As I mentioned before, it's so important that CPD is subject specific. Now that might mean particular curriculum topic areas that are subject specific. It might mean subject specific pedagogy areas in terms of how a certain area of curriculum is taught in a very kind of practical classroom sense. And sometimes it might be something that's quite generic. So perhaps a strategy from Teach Like a Champion or the Writing Revolution or something like that. But very much, first of all, linked to department priorities, as in the areas that need addressing urgently within a department, or first within a department. And secondly, in relation to subject-specific curriculum, so taking one of these generic strategies and sharing that discussion as to how will we apply it to a particular specific area of curriculum or areas of curriculum. As mentioned before, our CPD will be drastically improved if we can base it on some of the wonderful thinking that is already out there. And finally, this idea of what we really want for staff to leave our CPD with is not only the substance of that CPD itself, but also to develop a habit of engagement with the subject discourse. So like, if you're watching this video, you're probably already on Twitter, you probably already follow the CogSciSci hashtag. Now, what we really want is that everyone in our departments to be hooked onto those sorts of things. And part of, I think, of CPD, if we get it right, can be to bring people into that world, to support them in the various ways that they might need, whether it's the sort of technical, the navigation of sort of a site like Twitter, or the kind of the habits of reading sort of blogs in snatch moments of time, or just building people's confidence in the area that it's not obvious to everybody that you can just tweet people questions on Twitter and they almost always reply and are really helpful and kind and warm, and it's really just the most wonderful resource in that very sort of live and responsive sense. And if you don't know that, you don't know it until somebody shows you, unless you're kind of a natural explorer, unless you stumble across it. So if we can build that development into our CPD, then we'll end up with a team of people who are as hooked on this sort of thing as probably you are, and certainly I am. One of the questions that often comes up in relation to this is, should this department CPD be focused on curriculum or on pedagogy? And I've thought really quite hard about this, and the only conclusion that I've come to is that the terminology doesn't really matter here, and there's very much a sort of a place where they cross over. If we are talking about something, as I described before, in a subject-specific sense, then it will be incredibly valuable. If it's particularly if it can be aligned with department priorities and so on, we might be looking at absolutely very obviously curriculum-focused areas such as knowledge and explanations. We might be looking more on the side of kind of execution and how an explanation is delivered in a lesson, or we might be looking kind of really quite definitively sort of teaching and learning things, like how many whiteboards might be used on a certain type of problem in a lesson. So there's this kind of sort of spectrum, I think, between curriculum and knowledge and pedagogy or teaching and learning. And as long as we're not doing something that's generic and doesn't really, we're not talking about our subject itself, then we'll be on the right lines and it'll be really productive. So I wouldn't get too hung up on that terminology. Okay, this idea of beyond the session is absolutely key to the model that I'm suggesting today. Instead of having CPD as kind of a contained sort of single unit, or what we often sort of do quite often see today is a session of CPD and then a follow-up. But something that I'm advocating is before the session, to give out a pre-reading and some questions for staff to think about and to be prepared to discuss in that session. That's then followed by a session, and what you find is that staff have already had to engage their brains. They've possibly already been hooked onto, this blog is really good, or what's the book that this chapter's been taken from, all that kind of thing. And it means that staff are arriving primed, ready for discussion. Everybody, it's kind of like a bit of a no opt-out, I guess, in the staff sense. Everybody is provided with the means to participate, and there is an expectation that thinking and preparation has been done beforehand, so that session is really, really, really productive. That would be followed by some kind of follow-up, so that can be just a later discussion, or a drop into a lesson, or an invited visit into a lesson, or whatever sort of fits in terms of the school and the model and the nature of the CPD itself. And the other crucial thing about this model is that if it can be led on a rotation, so that all members of the department at some point are able to lead the CPD pre-reading, questions, session and follow-up, then that can be incredibly powerful, because what you're then asking staff to do is to select pre-reading. Now that might be something that you as subject leader or another sort of member of the department will support with. You could offer, you could suggest a number of potential readings and ask people to choose which one they think would be most appropriate. You can ask them to submit questions for the subject leader to have a look at and perhaps quality assure or discuss how they might be developed before those questions go out to the department in preparation for the CPD session. So what that's doing is kind of like a bit of a gradual release model, if you like, taking somebody through the process of finding something wonderful that's already been written out there, something in the subject discourse, reading it, thinking about it and applying it to our own subject and our own context, thinking about useful questions that would promote interesting discussion with the team, and taking kind of that sense of ownership of some useful and highly motivating discourse within a department is absolutely, it can be like a gateway drug really, in terms of people's engagement with the subject discourse, and it's incredibly powerful. Obviously, the choices for which sessions you choose to have led by other members of the department, that can be managed sort of quite carefully. So if you've got something that's quite critical, you might, if you've got sort of strong feelings on where that needs to go in terms of department as subject leader, that might be something you choose to lead yourself, and then something else where it's a bit more free and open, that might be something where you open it up to someone else within the department who you want to develop in that way. But this idea of the pre-reading and democratizing the leadership of that is a very powerful combination, in my opinion. Okay, so I've kind of identified sort of three kind of themes that this CPD might take. So the first one is if we are discussing how we're going to teach X. So the first kind of input to this might be an article in terms of the reading and the questions for discussion that go out, but it might not be a written article. It might be a video that you've got of someone doing some expert teaching, or it might be even someone within your department or someone you've invited in from outside the department going through some expert teaching, presenting some expert teaching of a particular topic to the department. And then that would be accompanied with these questions for consideration in advance that we've already mentioned. Then within the session, we would see that discussion and arriving at kind of an agreement of the key features that we want to make sure that all of us are including when we teach a certain topic area. And then also, on which areas are we prepared to have some flexibility. So, it's so important, isn't it, that we have consistency in terms of our use of language, because it's particularly, as children move from one teacher to another throughout their time with us in the school, the language that they use must be, a point of consistency from one year to the next, so that they can make that sense of the knowledge as they move through. In other areas, the level of flexibility and the level of consistency might be something that's perhaps more debatable. So, which are the best examples to use? Which are the best anecdotes? Which are the best contexts to teach? Is there a set of best lists, or is that something that might be better judged in relation to the group in front of us? Or should it be just down to a matter of personal preference with the teacher? Obviously, the answers to these sorts of questions will vary depending on the topic itself and the context of the department and the priorities and the nature of the school and the the nature of your leadership and all that kind of thing. But I think we need to be clear on what we expect to see and what we expect to be okay to deviate in terms of deviation. Before we kind of talk about how we're going to teach a certain topic, though, there are some topics where actually we need to be improving our subject knowledge so that we can start from a strong position when we start to plan our teaching. So there are some kind of key areas, aren't there, I think, that often are very amenable to this approach. So things like electricity, perhaps not so much now, but certainly probably in some cases working on the new energy model and so on. So in these sessions, we might again start with some pre-reading, but that might be perhaps just the booklet or an explanation from another area. And in terms of discussion, we might get together and solve some problems, and then be prepared then to sort of move on to theme one and discussion of how we want to go about teaching X, because almost all of the time these topic areas are areas that need subject-specific development of subject knowledge because they're very challenging. And if they're very challenging, then it means that there's a lot of thought to be had about how we can best teach them to our students in order to help them overcome that challenge. And then the third kind of model is, usually this is about when you don't have a particular topic or sequence of lessons in mind, but more an article or something that is worth thinking about. So it might be something that's a little bit more sort of generic or transferable. So there's been lots of interesting articles on in terms of like things like dual coding and things in science, or slot. And this is a particularly good area to, as I mentioned before, kind of that delegation of the leadership of CPD, because it can just almost sort of be anything that seems to be good and interesting and ready for discussion. So again, to start with the reading and some carefully thought out questions to get together and discuss responses to those questions, and to discuss how this might feed into curriculum work and any kind of concrete actions that need to take place, either in curriculum that's being written or in our own kind of teaching day-to-day practice within lessons. And that kind of takes us on to this issue of outcomes, because we've got to be able to say, haven't we, that our CPD is worthwhile. And we've got to be able to balance that with the fact that not everything that is valuable can be measured. And sometimes when we want to measure things, when we get obsessed with measuring things, we start focusing on not very useful things because they're very measurable. And we can, our priorities can kind of get distorted. We can end up doing some quite unhelpful things in school. So this is a tension that we kind of have to navigate, I think. So, you know, you might not be able to create a checklist from one of these CPD sessions and go and tick off a load of things and turn it all green on your spreadsheet. However, you might be able to do that for quite a lot of things. You know, if we've agreed that we'll see certain types of explanations in lessons, certain aspects of practice in lessons, those are the kind of things that actually we can go and see in lessons. And you know, we can arrange visits, and you know, we can have invited visits and things so that we can make sure that excuse me, so that you know, we don't have that kind of issue of, oh, you just came in at the wrong time and I was doing it before, and all that kind of thing. And again, kind of, you know, discussions about exercise books with staff, discussions with students as well can help us kind of get a window into the level of transfer from CPD into classrooms, all in like a low stakes developmental way. Hopefully that goes without saying, but you know, perhaps it doesn't. And it's not all about what we see in lessons all of the time, is it? Because some of the time, you know, we might have some CPD that's just developing people's understanding and just giving them a much stronger foundation for them to teach from in terms of subject knowledge, or we might be developing something in them that's just much bigger than an individual lesson. So we might be developing their understanding of a sequencing issue, for example, within the curriculum, and helping them to see how an idea like charge develops over time, feeds into various units in probably physics, chemistry and biology, and builds towards a very sort of sophisticated and well-structured schema at the end. And, you know, that's a really, really valuable thing for staff to develop. And you might not see that in a lesson at all, but you can have a conversation with a member of staff and ask them about various things, and again in a low stakes and developmental way. But there are observable kind of things that people can say in conversation, or not, or answers to questions that people can give in conversation, that can only be observed when that person has you know, come on a certain journey in terms of their own development and understanding. So just because we can't kind of measure something neatly, I think absolutely doesn't need to mean that we can't observe it and investigate it and follow it up in a meaningful way, so that we can have you know, so that we can be as confident as we can be about the efficacy of this the CPD that we are leading. So, in order for all this to be successful, there are a few things that are necessary. Time. I know that, you know, we never have enough time in teaching. but there is nothing more important in terms of, you know, developing the curriculum and teaching in your school. There is nothing more important than the subject-specific development of staff and the engagement in the subject discourse. So we need to give departments time in order to get together and have these discussions. We need to make sure that there is time for the follow-ups to happen in whatever form, whether it's lesson drop-ins or conversations or whatever. We're giving staff pre-reading and asking them to think hard about questions, so we need to factor that in as well into the time that we are directing staff to spend on their CPD. And also, you know, the leadership of all this from subject leaders and from other people, that also takes time. So to seek out good quality articles and so on, to, you know, sometimes there's a few articles and you're not quite sure, you know, sometimes, especially if you're a non-specialist, it's quite difficult to know actually if an article is good or not. So you need time to be able to get in contact with people whom you trust, to be able to give you a judgment on whether something's worth including for CPD. You know, I often kind of get in touch with a few chemists I know on Twitter about an article for chemistry and just kind of say, is this good? Because I don't really have enough subject knowledge to be able to make that decision on my own with any confidence. So all of this is what I'm saying, needs time, and we need to just be aware of that. I think we have to have a culture in our school of intellectualism and ongoing development. So this means that we champion reading, we praise and you know, we love it when people are reading blogs, we love it when people are writing blogs, we love it when people are engaged with their subject association, going to conferences and presenting at conferences, and you know, it's all very exciting and a wonderful part of our culture. You know, we all are very open about our own development and our own ongoing development, and at the same time, we never sort of champion ignorance or you know, bad mouth subjects or anything like that. You know, it's none of this, oh no, you've got maths next, unlucky, or oh god, you know, PE is a bit of a fake subject, isn't it? If we say things like that, they're just throwaway comments, but they are absolutely so detrimental to a culture of you know, subject specialism and pride in our subjects and intellectualism, and so we have to be very, very intentional about that, I think. And this is hard because you know, we've all still got so much to learn. You know, not just kind of within my school, but you know, I think this is true for everybody, everywhere. We need to be able to quality assure the articles and so on from the discourse that we're bringing into our CPD. And so to be able to do that, we need to be well read ourselves in both the subject discourse and in sort of more general kind of just education and teaching and learning and curriculum theory. And we also need to be, as I've sort of mentioned before, aware of when we don't know enough. We need to be aware that we don't know enough, and we need to know who we can ask and where we can go to find out more, so that we are able to ensure that everything that's coming into our school is of exceptional quality. Because the discourse is huge and it's variable. Not everything that you find on blogs, but even in books and journals, is of the same quality, and not all of it will be aligned with, you know, your own school and your own department's vision and ideology. So that needs to be sort of a bit of a critical consumption, and it needs to be informed. So that is everything on that model and the conditions for success. I hope it's been useful. If you have any questions, absolutely please do get in touch. That's all part of the discourse that I've just been endorsing, so it would be crazy not to. And if you'd like to discuss anything as well, please do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.